Hello and welcome to episode 3 of Pulumi for IT Pros. In this session we're going to have a look at the configuration file, which is going to help us make our projects a bit more generic and allow us to reuse the same code to deploy different environments with different settings, and basically just extracts a lot of our configuration out of the code to make it much easier to manage. Before we get started, I just wanted to mention something I should have mentioned in the last video, but if you're following along and want to have a look at any of the sample code from the session, it's all available in GitHub. If you go to github.com/sam-kogan, you'll see a Pulumi for IT Pros repository. We're going to cover using Git for storing our infrastructure code in the future, but for the minute, if you just go there, you can see the project and all those files that we looked at. Git has this concept of branches, which is basically different versions of the code. By default, you'll hit the main branch, which you can see here on this drop down. This will show the current state of affairs, whatever week we're on, in terms of when this is initially being broadcast. If you want to look at a specific week, if you go to main and drop down and click there, you'll see there is an episode 2. There will be one for each episode. If you click on that, that will show you the code as was at the end of that episode. So you can go have a look at that and consume any of the code there if you want to see how it's, take what I've done and fiddle with it. Feel free. So just to make you aware of that. Let's go back to VS Code and we are going to have a look at configuration. So what we've got here, we'll deploy, as we mentioned, a resource group and a storage account. But all the properties here are hard coded. So every time I run this, I will get the same resource group name, the same storage account. It will be in the same location, all those sort of things. And obviously that's not great. If we want to be able to have different environments, we want a dev, test and prod environment, we need to be able to vary things. Even if something as simple as just some of the names or the resource group name, for example, or something like that, we need to be able to fiddle with those. So what Pulumi has a concept of is a configuration file. So this pulumi.itpro-dev.yaml. And you will notice that's named, if you ignore the Pulumi bit at the beginning, itpro-dev is the name of the stack we're currently running on. So if we go back to the command line and we do a Pulumi stack ls, you can see in a second, password, that we're on the itpro-dev stack. And so if you recall, stacks are a bit like Terraform workspaces. They allow you to segregate your deployments into different sort of stacks that are, you have a dev stack, a prod stack, and so on. And the stack consists of the actual Pulumi code, which won't change between each stack. And it then consists of any configuration settings that go along with it, as well as a separate state file at the back end. So whenever you create a stack, you get a state file created for it, and you get a configuration file for it. The configuration file by default sits alongside the code and has the same name as the stack. You can vary that, so you can have it outside of the code, you can give it a different name, but then at deployment time you have to tell it that. By default, if you follow this built-in naming convention, when you run a deployment, it will just pick that stack because it knows the state, the name of the stack it's running, it will find the file. And if you click on that file, you can see it's just got one value at the minute, and it's that location that we passed in when we first set up the project. We didn't create this manually, it did that for us. There's a couple of other things. So it's got this encryption salt at the top here. This is just used to salt the password you entered for the local state in here. This is perfectly safe to put into Git and so on. This is not secret. It's just used as part of the unencryption process. When we use a backend, when we use something like Key Vault or something for this, we'll have some Key Vault details in here, but they're not there now. But then we have this config section, and this is where all our configuration values go. And the format you've got is someone's called a prefix here. So this is Azure native. It's basically a bucket or a bag to store particular values in. So you can have multiple buckets, and we'll see why that's useful in a minute. And then you have the name of the variable, and then you have the value. This is just a YAML file. You can enter them in here, and most of the time I manually type them in the file. But there is a Pulumi command line command to add these for you, and it's quite useful to use that if you're just learning and want to figure out the format of the value and so on. So we're going to go back to the command line and we're going to add a value. So Pulumi config set is the command, and then you're going to have the name of the property and the value. So we're going to set up a location one. This is going to be separate to the one that got added by default, just so that we have our own one set up in there. And then the value is going to be West Europe. So let's run that. That will ask you for the password because it needs to encrypt anything if it's secret, which this isn't, but it needs to know that. And if we go back to our config file, And you can see that's been added. And we've got the name of the location and we've got the actual location added. And it added this prefix in. This has been added by default. I didn't set this. And by default, this will set to the name of the project. And if you don't care about any of the things we're going to talk about in a second, then that's fine. And you can just use that and move on. What this prefix is effectively what Pulumi refers to as a bag or a bucket to put your values in. And it adds a scope to these. This is the default one. You see this as your native one is the one that gets added by default when you create a project. But you can have multiple different scopes. So we could add something like, let's say, a storage scope, and we want a different location for storage, and that's going to be North Europe. And so we could say, yeah, you're on a different location for the storage compared to everything else. And that's in a different bucket of config variables that you can access that we know are specific to storage. Maybe we want to add a networking one as well, which has an address range option. And that's going to be 10.0.01/22. Yeah, and so on. And you could have whatever buckets of config you want, and you'll see how we can access those separately in a minute. But we're not going to use that here. We're going to use the default, which is the project name. So what else are we going to add? We're going to add a name prefix that we're going to use. So if we change that, we'll add the same prefix. I'm doing this manually from the YAML file. You can also obviously use the command line if you wanted to. I'll call that name prefix. And the value is going to be IT Pro Dev. We also want to extract out this create storage container property into the config file, like we said we would do before. So let's add that in. Again, the same prefix. And the value can be true. Okay, and that's all we need for the minute. We're going to look at tags in a minute. We'll come back to that. So if we go back to our project, and what we need to do is we need to be able to reference these. So the way we do that is we create another variable. We're going to call it config. You can call it whatever you want. And we're going to go make the value of that the Pulumi library.config. And then brackets. And you can see in here, there is a string you can pass in. Now, we're not going to pass anything in that. And that by doing that, the string is the value for that bucket or prefix you're going to use. So if we leave it by blank, we're going to just get the default, which is the project name, or which is what we want. But if we wanted to, we could have a second bucket or that has the Pulumi.config, and that's going to have the storage prefix. So anything that was in that storage prefix bucket will get added to this config, and you can see we have those two separate config files, this one used by everything and this one used by storage on its own. But we don't need that, so we're going to remove that. So first thing, we want to use the location from the config file rather than hard coding it. So you see our resource group, we've hard coded West Europe. We want to get rid of that, and we're going to call that config variable. And there are two options you can use here. There is a get and there is a require option. The require option will look in the config file, and if the config value isn't there, it will throw an error. This is a mandatory. If you use get, if the config value is not there, it will just return null. It won't error. Obviously, the thing that consumes that might error, but it won't. And so that's useful if you want to do something based on whether or not a config value actually exists. For what we're doing, we need this value to exist, so we're going to use the require option, and then inside the brackets, you just put the name of the key that you want. Don't need to add the prefix because that's based on the value we used up in that Pulumi.config, which is set to nothing, which uses the default. So that will work for the location. We also want to change this create storage container one to use that. So we're going to do config.require, and then the name is the same as here. So we'll just wrap that in quotes and do that. And that won't work, or won't work the way we want, because this is going to return a string. And so this is basically saying if string, which doesn't really relate to anything. So what we actually need to do is change this to require bool. And what that will do is it will convert whatever comes back from the config file into this. Now, the config file itself doesn't understand Booleans. This is, as far as it's concerned, this is just a string called true. But that process will convert it into a Boolean so that we can then translate that in the Python code and see, yes, that is a true or false, whatever we call it. Okay, so that's changed that. The last one we want to do is use that prefix. We're going to use that on the storage account. So at the minute we hard code the name. So let's go ahead and change that. And we want to use that prefix. So config.require and then name prefix. Oops. That'll give us that prefix back, but we want to append something to the end of it to actually denote that it's a storage account and make the name unique. So we'll just use the plus option, which is how you concatenate strings in Python. And we'll say that's stg01. And that will create that unique name for the storage account based on the prefix. So you can vary the prefix depending on which environment you're in, and you'll get a different name for the storage account. Same bit at the end, but this might say at the minute it's set, what's it set to? It's set to IT Pro Dev. In the production environment, we might set that to IT Pro Prod, and that'll change the name of the storage account. Okay, and that should do it. So let's go back to the command line. And if we run Pulumi up, we're going to see some interesting stuff. Now you can see it's going to replace the storage account and the resource group. So what I'll do is it will delete the storage account and the resource group and recreate them. Now that's a bit odd. We haven't done anything specifically to that. If you look at the diff bit, it's telling us why. The account name's changed for the storage account, and that's actually valid, so fine. But the resource group name has changed, and the location of the resource group has changed. Well, that's a bit odd. Let's have a look at the details. So the resource group is the odd one. And so if we have a look at the resource group, oh, the location's changing from West Europe to West Europe lowercase. Ah, okay. That's to do with our config files. This won't actually make any difference in terms of Azure because Azure doesn't care whether it's uppercase or lowercase. But Pulumi has seen a change and is going to want to recreate that because you can't change the location of a resource group without deleting it. So it wants to delete and recreate that. So we're going to want to fix that so we don't have to do that. So if we go back to VS Code, go look at our config file. Okay, yeah, we put that in lowercase. So let's just change that to uppercase just to match what it was. The other option, if you did really want it in lowercase, then you could allow it to delete and recreate it, and it would do that, and you wouldn't have that problem. It's entirely up to you what you do with that. But let's go ahead and do that. Hopefully, this should be better. So this looks slightly different, better. It's not doing anything with the resource group. That looks fine, and it just wants to replace the storage account, which is correct because the account name's changed. We're using that naming prefix now. And then it wants to create the container because obviously, if you remember last time we deleted the container. So that is fine. Let's go ahead and create that. And hopefully it will create those resources with the values that come from our config file. Okay, so that seems to have worked. So if we go back to the Azure portal and go to the resource group, you see now, yeah, we've got our storage account. Still the right location, but it's got that new name, and we should see that the container exists. Yep, it does. Let's hop back to VS Code and just test out to make sure. We're going to change the storage container to false. Actually, the case here doesn't matter because it's converting to a Python value anyway. So lowercase should work fine as well. Let's go back to the command line and run that up again. And we should see that it wants to delete the container because we don't want it anymore. Yep. Looks good. So lastly, we're going to look at a little bit more complex configuration. So up till now, we've just done string key value mappings and booleans. We've done conversions from boolean and so on. What we want to do now is we want to store the tags in here. Now, if you remember, tags are a mapping, a dictionary effectively of key value pairs. And so we want to store that within the configuration file. And so we can manually add it in here, but I'll show you the config command for it so that you can test this out if you want to. So there is a command. We're going to use Pulumi config set again, but you can see we've got this path option, which allows us to define the actual path of an object that's more than just a string. So in our case, we've got tags, which is the top level object, and then we're going to add owner as a value within that. So let's add that in. And you can see if we go over to the config file, that it's now added that, and this is the format we want. So it's got tags as a top level value, and then underneath that, it's got additional ones. It's got the actual that key value. So if we add another one, just to make sure we see what's going on there. So we're going to say tags dot environment, and the value is going to be development. Add that and go back to VS Code. And we should see, yeah, it's added this environment one as well now. So you can see that we've got the list there as well. Oh, sorry, the dictionary as well. If you wanted to do a list rather than a dictionary, you could also do that. So we do similar sort of command, but what you would do is you would do, let's go whatever you want to call the list, and then 0 for the index, and the value, let's call it test string. So you can see we've got this list here with the name of list configured as a JSON list rather than a dictionary. So if you wanted just to have a list of items, you could do that. I'll go ahead and delete that because we don't want that one. So now we've got that in here, but we want to be able to go and consume that within our code. So we want to replace this tags object with our dictionary. So we're going to do config.require. Now there isn't a require dictionary. There is a require object, which is the catch-all for pretty much anything. And so the value in here, if we remember, is tags. And that will go and grab that object. Now in Python, This is going to work. It will do the work for us to convert that object into a dictionary that will be consumed by the tags. We don't need to do anything else. For other languages like TypeScript or C#, you probably need to cast that into a dictionary object, which is a little bit trickier, but effectively you would add a property around this to cast it to say, actually, this object is of type dictionary and dictionary string usually. If you look for casting in C# or in TypeScript, that should do that. But we can have a look at some examples of that in the future as well. But this will work for what we're going to do here. But at the moment, our tags only have the environment and the owner of them. We've deleted the date time piece. Now we don't want to put the date time in here. We don't want date created here because obviously that would be hard coded, and this is just a YAML file. We can't just do some logic in here. So what we're going to need to do is try and figure out how to add into that array. So to do that in Python is actually pretty easy. All we need to do is basically add another value to the tags object. And the syntax for that, if we just do tags and then square brackets and the name of the object we want to add, so we're going to call that date created, and then the value of that, which is going to be that date dot today method dot iso format, and that's it. So that tags now contains everything from the config file plus the date created to be added to there. So let's see if that all worked. Back in the command line, we'll run Pulumi up, password. I should really set that environment variable. But that should hopefully show us, yeah, it's going to update 2 items, and the difference is the tags. And if we hit details, we can see that the tags are being replaced, these are being removed, and the new ones are being added. And that's got the date created still, it's got the owner still being there, and then it's got the new one of the development environment. So we can see that's come from our actual code. And there we go, that's been updated. And we'll go just double check in the portal. So let's have a look at the storage account tags. There we go. That's got all of those that we expected. So you can see the config file is quite a powerful place to allow us to configure things and then actually vary them for environments. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to configure a second environment so that we can see how that actually works for that deployment. So we're going to come in here and we're going to go to the command line and we're going to do the Pulumi stack ls command just to look at the current stack. So you can see we've got one stack called IT Pro Dev. We want a new one with IT Pro Test. So the command to do this is Pulumi stack init to create a new stack. That's all we need if we don't want to change the secret provider, which we're not going to do here. We want to call this IT Pro test. That doesn't appear to be actually typing. Is that going to? No. Okay. And we can pass in the name as part of the command line as well. And so we just Pulumi stack init and then -s is the name of the stack. IT Pro -test. Let's see if that works. And so you need another passphrase. You can use the same one, you can use a different one for this. Set that up, and that should have created our stack. So if we do Pulumi stack ls, and you can see we've got dev and test, and it's actually selected test by default now. So we're on the test stack if we did an up, which maybe it may or may not be what you want. But if we go back to VS Code, you can see now we've got 2 config files. We've got the IT Pro Dev and IT Pro Test. If you click on test, it's going to be blank at the minute. So what we need to do is we're just going to copy those values over, and then we're going to change what we want to change here. So the name prefix is going to be that. We are going to put our location in a different one. So we're going to use North Europe for our location. You don't really need to change this as your native location one is basically the default that gets used if you don't set a value. We always set a value, so it's not really going to be used, but yeah, you can set it if you want. We're going to create the storage account container, and the environment obviously needs to be changed to test. So that's the settings done. Now, if we deploy this, we're going to have a bit of an issue because the resource group name is going to be the same. It's going to try and create 2 resource groups, and it's going to fail on the second one. So we need to add this to our config. So in the development one, we're going to add, I'm doing it manually here. I'm going to call it resource group name, and we're going to leave that as it is today, so that doesn't change. Just check I've done that properly. And so we're going to go into our main here, and we're going to use that. So config.require resource group name. Okay. In our test environment, we are going to call it IT testers. Just give it a different name. Now, We could have obviously used the naming prefix in the resource group. That would also work as well. It depends how you want to do it. You can call it out separately. Either way works. But that should be all we need. I'm hoping that doesn't cause any clashes. So if we now go back over to our command line, we've got that IT Pro-test stack selected. But if we run the Pulumi up command, we can also specify it at the command line as well. So you can run the --stack command and then give it the stack name as well, if you prefer to make sure you declare it that way rather than selecting it using the CLI command. So if we run that, and what we should see is it now wants to create all those resources because they don't, and it should have all those new settings that we pulled in from the config file that are different. So yeah, this is going to be created. If we look at the details, you can see we've got the test environment tag set up. If we look at the resource group, we've got the Pulumi for IT testers resource group. So that looks all correct. So we'll run that. And so you can see, hopefully, that this can make it really flexible to be able to have use the same Pulumi code, but vary the settings by updating that config file. And you could do something as simple as changing the naming things, but you could get it configured how many resources you want in test versus dev to make things quicker in test. You could have things like varying permissions based on which environment it is. People locking down production much more strongly than dev and all that sort of stuff. Now, there are absolutely other ways that you could pull in configuration from other places. You could pull it in from databases, app configs, things like that. We'll look at that at some point in the future. But as a sort of simple configuration store, this is a really nice way to work with what's built into Pulumi. If we quickly drop over to the Azure portal again, and we go have a look at resource groups, we should have, if we refresh this, we can just do a search. Got Pulumi for IT testers there, and we've got those resources that we set up as well. There are also a couple of more advanced things we can do with configuration. There's some project YAML level configuration settings we can do. We'll cover those in a future video for some more advanced features. For now, what we've done today hopefully is a good start to make your projects more generic and allow you to have that quick and easy switching between different environments with different settings using the same reusable infrastructure. I hope that all made sense. Again, ask me if you have any questions or any comments or anything you want to know more about, and hopefully I will see you next time when we are going to have a look at doing loops within your code to be able to deploy multiple versions of an object and so on. So hopefully I will see you then.